Hello, I'm David Rudmin, and I would like to thank Levi for letting me be on his channel, and hopefully I can bring some new stuff to spice up the mix. And today I'm going to start with the #1 source for nearly all my theology in my theological career, also my geography, a lot of my spirituality, and that's this lady, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich. She is the greatest oracle in the history of the church, and today in this video you're going to learn why she's significant, how she is so far yet undiscovered by and large by Christians and Catholics, and then also where her revelations came from. We'll go through their background so you'll know all the evidence for her, any potential arguments against her, and then why I go with her, which is something that nobody else can give you except this video right here. So stay tuned, I'll make it as concise as possible. Alright, so this is Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, and she lived from 1774 to 1824. Most of that life she was an Augustinian nun, bedridden as you see, and she had numerous supernatural experiences. Growing up, she had them also, and she would witness her guardian angel and have visions of the life of Christ. Even at her youngest ages, she was having these, and she later wrote that she had no idea that other people around her weren't having all these experiences, these supernatural experiences. So she soon became a nun, and her sufferings increased much because her particular role in life was to save many souls, and in particular to suffer for Germany in that time, which had just been ravaged by the War of 1812, and in which the church had pretty much collapsed. And so she had lots of sufferings, and interspersed with her suffering, she had all these visions of the life of Christ. She actually would have like the same vision over and over and over of each event, so that later in life, when she would write it down, we'll often get several takes of the same vision. And so those visions are today brought to us in this book here. I don't know if you can see that, but this is her 4-volume Life of Christ. This one is produced by a subsidiary of TAN, I think, called St. Benedict Press. And they're excellent reads. You should definitely buy them and have them ready to read every Sunday. There's older versions by other publishers too. This one came out in like the 1918 or something, and its German version is as old as maybe 1900. And this was collated by an editor, I think Charles Schmoger. Yeah, arranged and edited by Charles Schmoger. But that was like 1880s before it was coalesced into this 4-volume Life of Christ. 2 other books come from this 4-volume Life of Christ. One is just the tiny version, which is those parts that concern the Blessed Virgin Mary, and it's identical word for word to what's in the 4 volumes, but it's just that Marian stuff. And then there's also the famous Dolores Passion, which is just the tiny section of volume 4 which concerns the crucifixion and resurrection. And that Dolores Passion is what Mel Gibson used when he made his famous video The Passion, which you probably have already seen multiple times, but if you haven't, you should, because the level of detail in that is no mistake. It comes definitely from Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich. So, what is this oracle? Who is she? I mean, my goodness. Why hasn't she been discovered by now? Okay, so I took these 4 volumes and I decided, I'm going to try to find where this stuff is. Why would I want to do that? Well, because it had already been done once. Back around 1900, some traveling, amateur archaeologist read in her 4th volume, right at the end she says that the Apostle John took the Blessed Virgin into his home, they went off to Ephesus, and he built a stone house for her. Okay, so here we are in Google Earth. And Anne Catherine Emmerich lived way up here in Dolmen, near Cologne in northwest Germany in Westphalia. And around 1900, some amateur archaeologists were reading through volume 4 at the end, where she says that the Apostle John received the Blessed Virgin as his mother and then took her off to Ephesus and built a house for her at Ephesus in the Jewish community. And she describes intimately where they lived in a Jewish colony kind of in the hills south of Ephesus. And so these amateur archaeologists, I think one was a priest, went over here to Ephesus in the Ottoman Empire at the time and started hunting to see if they could find anything like that. And lo and behold, they found the stone house that St. John had built for her there on the hills south of Ephesus. And you can see it here. So this is the same room structure of what's described in her writings. So this was the place where the Blessed Virgin actually died, in the Dormition, and where she was buried. And then a few days later, her body was removed from the tomb when the apostles saw some lights back there. And they didn't know it yet, but then the Apostle Thomas arrived late, and so they wanted to show the Apostle Thomas her body and opened up the tomb, and lo and behold, it wasn't there. So that's why the church to this day believes in the Assumption. So anyways, this has become a tourist site to this day, and it's all because of Anne Catherine Emmerich. So I thought to myself, well, gee, I mean, why not go and see if any more of these sites, which in her 4 volumes are also identifiable, and because we have lots of great resources. We have, as you see on the map here, the Rumsey historical maps, which are the very first maps made of the area by the early British and French colonizers. And then we have things like the Barrington Atlas, which is the modern state-of-the-art version of the ancient world. And then we also have things like Ptolemy's geography from 150 AD. Here you can see Palestine's Thesis, the layout of Palestine. Or there it is up there. And Ptolemy gives these coordinates here. So this thing is at 64 1/4, 30 2/3 if you use the Greek system of numbering. So Ptolemy gives us coordinates. And then 200 years later, so Ptolemy gives us maps like this. And then 200 years later, you get maps like this from the Roman mail system called the Pudinger map. So all this stuff you can get on my website, ancientmiddleeast.com. You can download the pinned Google Earth version of these things where I actually locate these things. So anyways, this had already been done. So what I did is I took this premise and I went to Google Earth and I decided to start hunting down these locations in the 4 volumes of the Life of Christ. And lo and behold, it works. It works incredibly well because you can triangulate what Anne Catherine Emmerich says. She'll say, like, for instance, Christ walked 3 hours from this city to that city, then 5 hours from that city over to here. And we already know where some of these places are. So I try to throw in every bit of knowledge I possibly can to try to locate where a city is. And this is my website, ancientmiddleeast.com. And the first one here, the Holy Land according to Anne Catherine Emmerich, is the one you want to go to. So you can download the most recent update right there at the top. But this particular one I finished satisfactorily. And so when I finish a repository, I make a whole map. So you can see and print up this map here. And there's a couple other nice things that you could grab also below it. In addition, later on, I went on and mapped other parts of the world using the same Roman maps that I used to map the Holy Land with her. So you can grab that if you like. But in any case, the most amazing thing is that all these descriptions that she has of the geography of the Holy Land, they work out. And so I will be referring to this constantly throughout my talks here. And if you download this file from ancientmiddleeast.com and just download that, then you can have this on your computer and you can click on any one of these pins and see everything that Anne Catherine Emmerich ever said about it. Yellow pins are ones where I'm confident I know where it's at based on her and other evidence. Red pins are ones that I'm not. So for instance, you see here, Acrobus is yellow. I'm confident I know where Acrobus is. And there's the Mishnah name for it, and Catherine Emmerich's name for it, and then the Roman name. And today it's Kirbet al-Akrabania. That sounds like Acrobus, don't you think? Akrabania. But of course, modern people, when the Jews came back to the Holy Land and renamed all the things, they have their own guess for where Acrobus is. So everybody assumes it's there. But it's not. It's up here. And, that happens a lot. Like, here's Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. Everybody assumes, oh, no, that's the normal site of Shiloh, way down here. And perhaps there were 2 Shilohs, that's possible. But Anne Catherine Emmerich definitively says, oh, it wasn't just Shiloh, it was Tanath Shiloh. so I hunted around, and based on her descriptions of how many hours it was to walk from the Grove of Mambre down here all the way up to Tanith Shiloh. And so I was able to get a radius of where Tanith Shiloh might be, and behold, ran into the city of Khirbet, which means ancient ruin of Khirbet Tana. So hunting around here based on her descriptions of what could be seen from Tanith Shiloh, how you could see across the Jordan River Valley up into Jordan and down to the Dead Sea like that, then I figured out where I'm pretty sure Tanith Shiloh is, according to her. Other things like that, big discoveries would be like Bethel there. Everybody assumes Bethel is far off to the southwest. It's not. It's definitely there from her description, and also from the trek that Jacob would have taken when he was heading through here up to take his wife from Laban, Rachel, and had his vision of the ladder stretching to heaven where he laid his head on the stone of scone there. Phos-el, like the Bible even mentions Phos-el. They just mistranslated it as quarries, but and then here's Ai. Nobody knows where Ai is. It's a massive archaeological mound waiting to be dug up. This was where the Jews sacked the giant city just moments after crossing the Jordan. And everybody thinks, oh, the city of Ai is way up here near Akkar. But no, it's not. There's no reason the Jews would be way 40 miles northwest, right after crossing the Jordan, and Catherine Emmerich describes quite well where Ai is, and so yeah, it's right there, and the archaeologists should have at it. Okay, so anyways, there's zillions of things like this in her writings, and the world is just waiting to find out about them whenever people decide to deal with it. So now that we know how big of a threat Anne Catherine Emmerich is to everything that academia holds dear, we have to consider whether she's merit and trustworthy or not. I mean, because one of two possibilities. It's like the choice over Christ. Either he's a fool or he's God. In the same way with Anne Catherine Emmerich, either she's a total imposter or she's a grace from Almighty God. So which is it? And to handle this question, we really need to analyze in a meta way her claims and her context and those in particular surrounding her. So the arguments against her center around this guy. This guy is Clement Brentano. He was a German poet. He was born in 1774 about, and then at age 40 in 1818, he became a Catholic. So Brentano came then to Anne Catherine Emmerich's bedside, and he's the actual transcriber who wrote down all her words from which were created these 4 volumes or 2 volumes, however you slice it up. So the arguments against Anne Catherine Emmerich are usually claims that this guy was the actual writer, the imposter who fabricated and made up everything. Now we have to think to ourselves, is this likely? First of all, Anne Catherine Emmerich had to be a genius in multiple fields. She had to know Middle Eastern geography like the back of her hand at a time, as you saw in my Rumsey historical maps, when the very first European maps of the Holy Land were coming back. And by that I mean surveys, so that you would actually know distances and line of sight and things like that. So that 1818, when this guy arrives at her bedside, is when that first Rumsey historical map that I had there on the screen appears. Napoleon had gone up there and his surveyors had taken the lay of the countryside. Then the British had invaded under Allenby, and they took the survey of the countryside. So this person had an incredible Google Earth level understanding of Middle Eastern geography. That's like indisputable in my opinion. But then they also had to be a superior exegete. Because look at me. I am bachelor summa cum laude in theology from one of the most famous Catholic colleges in the country, Christendom College. And I've been reading the Bible every Sunday for most of my life. I have questions. And many of my questions have been solved by looking at Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich's writings, where she gives like a simple explanation that will explain it. And here at tandefspi.org is where you can get all these writings online. So you don't even have to buy the 4 volumes of the Bibles. You just click on one and go start reading. So, like, for instance, why was James and John referred to as brothers of the Lord? Well, she gives an actual family tree, my goodness, of not just James and John, but, oh my goodness, John the Baptist there, Joachim and Anne, of course, Thaddeus and James the Lesser, and, Mary Cleopas, the women, of course. All this stuff that nobody knows, but somehow she claims to know it. Tons of problems over how Mary was conceived, or how, the Old Testament worked out. She gives even massive systems that were supposedly secrets in the Old Testament, such as why we had to have such a huge delay until the coming of Christ. Well, she says it was waiting until the female line could be purified of the effects of original sin, until there could finally be a woman born who would be worthy enough to be the Ark of the Covenant and carry the immortal incarnate God in her body for 9 months. So that's not in the Bible. And she says, well, actually, this was a secret that was kept by the high priests, the prophets, and later on the Essene community, and was preserved in the Ark of the Covenant, and was a lot of the basis for a lot of the stuff in Genesis that we just don't really understand why the patriarchs were doing things this way. Well, she gives the explanation. You can just go and read this stuff online, and you realize that she has a theologian's level of expertise. Would Clement Brentano have both a geographical and a theologian's expertise? Not likely. I mean, he could have hit it. But then there's the moral argument, too, because if you had been such a superstar in these areas, would you just lie and base your whole life on this elaborate hoax that's against the 8th commandment that will get you hell eternally? I mean, people who study this stuff do it because they love it, not because they want to fake it. Napoleon wanted to fake the Quran. He didn't get far. People who want to fake stuff don't tend to get far. So if she's a fraud, well, there's 2 problems with that. One is her breadth, and the other is her detail. So whoever did this had to have been an expert in the Gospels already. Clement Brentano had just converted to the faith. There is no conceivable way that he could have known the Gospel well enough in order to create a fill-in-the-blank backstory on the Gospel the way she did. So her breadth, she covered the entire Middle East, far more than the earliest maps that were just coming out at that moment. So it's pretty unlikely that there's anybody at her bedside, or even anyone in that century, that could have done what she did, unless it was the other possibility, that she really was a grace from Almighty God. And then we have to consider God's motives. Why would God want to do this at this time and place in history? Why did God have to wait 1,800 years to give us the explanation for everything in the Bible? Everything in the Gospels? Everything in like Genesis? Well, you have to keep in mind what God's purpose is. And you'll understand God's purpose too better if you read her first chapters on Genesis. God's purpose is not to just give away all the answers. God requires a darkness, a hiddenness. We see things as through a glass darkly. So God has to allow that there shall be an actual test of people to choose either good or evil, and it won't be a dead giveaway. So God only gives graces, supernatural miracles, occasionally. He doesn't do it all the time. This is a classic objection from every last atheist. Well, why doesn't God just show up and tell us? Well, he does tell people who pursue it. If this is the world as a test to show that you love him. So as Augustine said, believe, and then you'll start to understand. So do that here. Believe, and then things will start coming together. Because God has to allow that the devil can take his cut. I mean, the devil is the prince of this world, the prince of the upper air. And how did he get that? He was crowned that by Adam, our forefather. So, sin will have its end, and grace will have its end too. And so God's going to beat the devil in a fair game. And he's going to show the devil that, hey, there are Christians out there who chose me freely without any mental coercion, but they actually merited each step of the way on their own, by their own goodwill, rather than just being forced into it like marbles in a pinball game. So coming back to Anne Catherine Emmerich then, why would God have done this in 1818 to 1824? Well, we have to think to ourselves, why did God allow all these other apparitions throughout history? Think back, Fatima or Rwanda. Why did Our Lady appear in Rwanda 20 years ago? Well, obviously there was about to be a major disaster there, right? The slaughter of the Hutus and the Tutsis in 2,000 years ago. Why did Our Lady appear in Akita, Japan? Well, there was going to be a major disaster there. They're going to have the Fukushima quake, and we might even get the third trumpet coming here with nuclear pollution over the whole world. Okay, why did Our Lady appear in Fatima? And then the two satellite appearances related to it, La Salette and Knock. Why did she do that? Well, what year did it occur? 1917. What started then? Communism! Okay, so every time you see a pattern here, every time Our Lady appears, God permits her to appear because there's a much greater, worse thing coming usually. So what could have possibly been happening in 1818 to 24 that God knew was coming, that he would give us the answers ahead of time, so that the integrity of the deposit of the faith and of the church's belief would be defendable by anyone? Oh, modernism and its subset, historical revisionism. God knew that there's going to be a Jesus seminar coming along here in which academic PhDs filled with their own arrogance are going to say, oh, we, from our 1900s or 1800s perspective, are so intelligent that we can look back to the original authors and we can tell that, oh, it wasn't written by whom it was said it was written. It was written by multiple people. Ha ha ha, JEBT. And, oh, all these events didn't actually happen. There are natural explanations for them. Christ was not supernatural at all. Christ didn't even know what was going on. Or, oh, we can weed out line by line in the text what the actual event was, not what the report by the gospel writer says it was. So this historical revisionism was about to sweep across Europe and into the Americas, and that's, I think, why God gave us the enormous blessing of Anne Catherine Emmerich. As we say in the Easter liturgy, "O happy fault that won for us so great a salvation. And all good things work together for good to them that love the Lord." So thanks be to God that we had historical revisionism come on the scene, that God needed to give us a light as bright as the blinding bird's eye video view of the entire life of Christ coming to us in the 4 volumes of Anne Catherine Emmerich. So I hope you enjoyed this video today. I hope you go look and read her books. A good place to start, since it's Lent, is The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. Then you can move on to the actual words in the Dolores Passion, and then The Life of the Virgin Mary, because that will give you the structure that you need to understand the mysterious plans of God in bringing about Christ, so that then you'll finally be most competent to move straight to the final big 4 books in the life of Christ. And then beyond that, if you want to go even deeper into Anne Catherine Emmerich, you can buy these 2 books from Tan, and these 2 books contain the anecdotes from her own personal life. So not really so much the visions of Christ, but just how she lived day by day and survived all the sufferings that she had to go through, and then all like the visions she would have as she would encounter each and every relic that was put on her bedside, and also her interactions with her confessors, with visitors, the supernatural signs coming out of her body, like all the bleeding and all the horrible sufferings. But you have to be aware that this stuff is pretty wild stuff. And if you start with that, you'll get a big sense of not only the truth, whatever it is, but also like the German spiritual hysteria that was indicative of that era. So you have to kind of read it through discerning glasses. So once again, thanks to Truthworthy for having me on here, and I will be referring to Anne Catherine Emmerich frequently, so that in all my discussions in the future, because she almost always has something definitive to say about any scriptural or theological topic. All right, have a nice night.